opened the east stand when it was built at about 2 weeks' notice because they'd been let down. I can't remember who by. And as it happened, the horse was lame, so I wasn't competing at the weekend.
Wow.
So I went.
Sliding
And about
doors.
a month later, they wrote and asked me if I'd like to become patron.
Balmoral Castle had always been a place of quiet tradition, a retreat where time seemed to pause, tucked away from the chaos of royal obligations. But on that particular summer day, the silence felt heavier than usual, as if the stone walls themselves could sense that history was about to shift. Black cars arrived one by one, rolling up the gravel path with a hush that made even the birds still. Inside, palace staff stood by the windows, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a holiday or a casual family gathering. It was an emergency, and the faces stepping out of those vehicles carried the weight of it. Prince William was among the last to arrive, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the estate like a soldier entering unknown territory. He knew his father's health had been declining, but no one had warned him of anything this sudden, this urgent. Beside him, Princess Catherine moved with a grace that belied the worry hiding behind her eyes. Even she had not been given all the details. The summons had come too quickly, too quietly, and now the entire royal family was assembling under the same roof for reasons that remained painfully unclear. Inside the drawing room, the atmosphere was thick with unease. A long oak table stretched across the center, flanked by portraits of monarchs who had ruled through war, scandal, and centuries of tradition. Their painted stares loomed over the living, as if silently judging the choices unfolding below. That room filled slowly, Prince Edward whispering to Sophie, the Duke of Kent standing stiffly in the corner, Princess Beatrice and Eugenio exchanging anxious glances. Everyone was here. Everyone except King Charles. And then Princess Anne stood. There was no fanfare, no official announcement, just the soft scrape of her chair and the sudden silence that followed. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture was steeled by decades of discipline. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear, steady, but it trembled ever so slightly at the edges, betraying the enormity of what she was about to say. She carried with her a sealed letter. It had been handwritten months before by King Charles himself. It was his final wish. A document that, until now, had been seen only by a few trusted hands. As she opened it, the family leaned in, their hearts pounding in unison. Prince William's gaze locked onto his aunt's face, bracing for what was coming, yet still completely unprepared. And then it came. The room froze as Anne read the words aloud. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a confession. It was a directive, a deeply personal, possibly controversial final request from the king. One that, once spoken, could never be unheard. William blinked, his eyes reddening, his breath catching in his throat. He had been groomed for duty his entire life. He'd worn the crown in waiting like a second skin, but nothing. Not the pressure, not the protocol, not even the pain of losing his mother had prepared him for this. As Princess Anne folded the letter back into its envelope, the silence that followed wasn't just from shock. It was from the realization that everything had changed. The hierarchy, the plan, the future of the crown itself, it was all suddenly uncertain. And Prince William, he wasn't just holding back tears. He was holding back the full weight of a kingdom on the edge. But what exactly did Princess Anne reveal, and why was this wish hidden from the public until now? For months, the letter had remained sealed, tucked away in a private drawer known only to a handful of the Queen's most trusted confidants. Not even her own children knew what she had written in her final days. But when Princess Catherine unfolded the letter and read its contents aloud, the air inside Balmoral shifted. The silence that had followed Princess Anne's revelation was nothing compared to the stunned paralysis that now gripped the room. Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history, had made a final, deeply personal request, one that would shake the very lineage of the crown. Her words weren't ceremonial, they were decisive. She had named Catherine, the Princess of Wales, not simply as consort, to a future king, but as a future queen in her own right, a queen regnant. The meaning was clear. Catherine would not merely stand beside the throne, she would sit upon it. Rule it alone. Gasps followed. Some tried to contain it, but there was no masking the disbelief. For centuries, the monarchy had clung to tradition, to male lineage, to the strict passing of power from father to son. Even in the rarest exceptions, it was never a decision made lightly. And now, to hear that Queen Elizabeth had envisioned something so radical, so quietly revolutionary, was almost unthinkable. But it was real. In her final days, Elizabeth had not only blessed Catherine's future, she had chosen it. The shock hit King Charles hardest. His pale expression, already weakened by illness, drained further. Everything he had spent decades preparing the succession he had meticulously managed was suddenly cast in shadow. Not because of a rebellion or scandal, but because of his own mother's final wish. A wish that rewrote the rules he had long believed unshakable. Across the table, Queen Camilla's posture remained still, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She had fought for acceptance in a public that once vilified her. She had endured the cold stares, the whispered disapproval, the long years in the background. And finally, she had been named Queen Consort, standing beside Charles not only as his wife, but as a figure of restored dignity. But now, it seemed even Queen Elizabeth had never truly envisioned her in that role permanently. The title, once seen as a symbol of triumph, now felt temporary, transitional, a placeholder until Catherine's time came. For the family, the difference between Queen Consort and Queen Regnant was more than semantics. A consort walks beside power. A regnant holds it. One offers support. The other commands. To the public, Catherine had long been the picture of grace and quiet strength. But now, it appeared that Elizabeth had seen something more, something worthy of the crown itself. Unease rippled through the room like a quiet storm. Advisors exchanged wary glances. What did this mean for the monarchy's future? For Charles's reign, already strained by illness and rising public scrutiny? And more urgently, how would the crown handle a plan that now seemed to bypass everything Charles had built? But if the Queen had such a vision for Catherine, what does that mean for Charles's carefully planned reign? Behind the castle walls, the king fought a silent war, not just with cancer, but with time itself. In February 2024, doctors delivered a diagnosis that echoed louder than any royal announcement. King Charles III had cancer. The revelation didn't come with royal trumpets or dramatic headlines. It came quietly, carefully, wrapped in the kind of language the monarchy had mastered over centuries, dignified, restrained, and shrouded in ambiguity. At first, the palace said little, only that His Majesty was undergoing treatment, that he remained in good spirits, that royal duties would continue as scheduled. But inside Clarence House, behind the thick velvet of protocol and secrecy, the truth was far more fragile. Charles's world began to shrink. His mornings, once bustling with red boxes of official papers and non-stop briefings, became slower, quieter. The king who had once championed environmental policy with tireless energy and traveled the world as Prince of Wales now moved cautiously, measuring each moment. The public only saw the surface, a man waving from the balcony, smiling. At Easter services, appearing calm during brief engagements. But those close to him noticed the details, the sudden cancellations, the thinning frame, the way he sometimes gripped the edges of a table a little too tightly. His signature walk through palace corridors, once brisk and purposeful, was now deliberate, as though every step carried the weight of uncertainty. Unlike Queen Elizabeth II, who had kept her health battles cloaked in silence until the very end, Charles made a choice that marked a break in royal tradition. He acknowledged the truth. Not all of it, but enough. He let the world know he was ill. Not because he had to, but because he believed that silence could be more damaging than honesty. And that choice triggered a rare shift in public perception. Thousands across the UK and beyond saw in their monarch not just a crown, but a human being. Someone aging, someone vulnerable, someone confronting a battle so many had faced themselves. Still, the decision to be transparent came at a cost. The monarchy press began asking questions the palace wasn't ready to answer. What kind of cancer? What stage? How long does he have? Officials stuck to their carefully crafted responses, but speculation swirled. Behind the scenes, the royal calendar was being redrawn. Trips were postponed. Engagements were shortened. A quiet operation began to reassign duties, redistribute appearances, and preserve the king's energy for only the most essential moments. Inside Clarence's house, the atmosphere had changed. Staff whispered in the halls, watched his diet closely, and learned to recognize the signs when the color in his face faded, when his voice lost strength, when he asked for a familiar comfort meal instead of the usual fare. He was still ruling, still reading, still thinking. But it wasn't the same. He was no longer preparing for the future, he was negotiating with it. Every decision now came with an unspoken urgency. Time was no longer a backdrop. It had become a deadline. And all the while, Prince William watched, stepping in more frequently, attending meetings once reserved for his father, sitting in chairs once filled by a monarch still alive, but slowly stepping back. Because as the king's strength fades, the pressure grows for the man next in line, Prince William, raised for the crown, but never prepared for the timing. William's moment came sooner than expected. From the moment he was born, the path ahead had always been clear. He would inherit the throne someday, but someday always felt far off, buried beneath the lives of others, cushioned by the presence of stronger shoulders. His father, King Charles, had waited for the crown longer than any heir in history. That wait created a buffer, a space for William to breathe, to live, to grow into his role without the full weight of expectation. But the moment Charles was diagnosed with cancer, that buffer vanished, and William was thrust forward. Whether he was ready or not, he had always been more than a figurehead. Unlike previous heirs, William wasn't raised in a royal bubble. He walked the corridors of Eton, mingled with classmates at St. Andrews, and flew helicopters through hostile skies as a search and rescue pilot in the Royal Air Force. These weren't just symbolic gestures, they were real, grounding experiences. They shaped a man who understood more than just protocol. William saw struggle. He witnessed fear. He carried responsibility in life-or-death moments long before the weight of the monarchy pressed down on him. But nothing, not even the chaos of a helicopter rescue or the scrutiny of the press, compared to the reality he faced now. With King Charles stepping back, William stepped in, quietly at first. A few more state briefings, a handful of private audiences with ministers. Increased visibility at royal events, but behind the scenes, a transformation had begun. The Duchy of Cornwall, once managed with Charles's meticulous touch, now rested in William's hands. And with it came the power not just to manage royal lands, but to influence the financial and social strategies of the crown itself. He wasn't just inheriting titles, he was shaping the monarchy's direction in real time, yet power came with pressure. Every move William made was watched, dissected, criticized. The public wanted a modern royal, engaged, authentic, relatable. But they also demanded tradition, stability, perfection. Walking that line became a daily test, and still, he remained committed. Because he wasn't just doing it for the monarchy, he was doing it for his family. For Catherine, who carried her own growing burden. For George, Charlotte, and Louis, whose childhoods he fiercely protected. At home, he was still a father first, a husband, a man determined to give his children the stability he had lost at such a young age. So he redefined the role. Less pomp, more purpose. Less protocol, more people. He championed mental health, spoke out on climate change, visited the homeless. And with every engagement, he made it clear this wasn't the monarchy of the past. He was building something new, something real, and the world took notice. The crown was no longer just a symbol, it was beginning to feel human again. But as William rises, another silent power shift is happening, and it's directed straight at Queen Camilla. She spent years repairing her image, but now, Camilla's position might vanish with a single wish. It was never easy for her. From the very beginning, Camilla was cast as the outsider, the interloper, the woman who stood in the shadow of a fairy tale gone wrong. Public opinion wasn't just cold, it was merciless. She was blamed for everything, from the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage to the tarnishing of the royal brand itself. Yet, through sheer resilience, silence, and time, Camilla clawed her way back into public favor. Slowly, painfully, one appearance at a time, one charity visit after another, until at last, Queen Elizabeth II gave her blessing. A title, once unthinkable, became official: Queen Consort. Not just a wife, not just a partner, but a recognized figure beside the king. But now, all of it hangs by a thread. Elizabeth's letter, her final wish, was supposed to bring clarity. Instead, it has unleashed confusion. Because if the Queen truly saw Catherine as more than a consort, if she envisioned her as a reigning monarch in her own right, then what did that say about Camilla's future? Was she ever meant to be more than a temporary placeholder? Was her crowning moment simply a detour until a more beloved figure could take her place? Inside palace walls, the questions are whispered but never spoken aloud. Yet, the implications are deafening. Publicly, Charles continues to stand by his wife. He has defended her, honored her, and elevated her. But privately, even he cannot ignore the shift happening around them. The people adore Catherine. She embodies everything the monarchy needs to survive: stability, grace, and a modern appeal. She's the bridge between tradition and transformation. And whether Camilla wants to admit it or not, her presence is being re-evaluated in real time. Among the royal family, opinions vary, but fractures are forming. Some still see Camilla as the rightful queen consort, a stabilizing figure in turbulent times. Others, especially those closest to William and Catherine, believe it's time to move forward. The monarchy, after all, cannot survive by clinging to the past. And Catherine represents the future, a future Queen Elizabeth herself may have. Quietly designed long before the rest of them realized. It's not just personal, it's political. A shift in roles at this level sends a message across the Commonwealth, to governments, to allies, and to the public. If Camilla is quietly pushed aside, it could be seen as an admission that the monarchy misread the public, that it crowned the wrong queen. But keeping her front and center, in light of Elizabeth's wish, could be interpreted as resistance to the very legacy the late queen tried to leave behind. Camilla's dilemma isn't just about losing a title. It's about being erased after finally being seen. Everything she endured, every indignity she swallowed, every headline she ignored, it all threatens to unravel. And while Camilla faces uncertainty, the weight of unspoken tensions begins tearing at the royal family from the inside. Behind the polished smiles, whispers of betrayal and confusion ripple through the royal bloodline. While the cameras captured carefully curated moments of unity, behind closed doors, the royal family was quietly unraveling. The Queen's final wish didn't just challenge tradition, it cracked the very foundation of hierarchy and loyalty. In Montecito, Prince Harry and Meghan watched the chaos from a distance, far from the corridors of power but still tied to its legacy. Their silence was telling. Neither rushed to speak, but those close to them say the shock was palpable. Read, Queen Elizabeth had been planning a future that elevated Catherine beyond consort. What did that mean for their children Archie and Lilibet, who once held a place in that future, however distant? The Queen's letter didn't just omit them, it reframed everything. Back in the UK, unease settled into the lesser-known branches of the family. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie once reassured that they had quiet but respected places within. The royal structure began asking the same questions echoing through the palace. Where did they fit in now? And what of Lady Louise Windsor, the young royal who had only just stepped into the public eye? These weren't just passing insecurities. These were deep doubts sparked by a shift in succession so unprecedented it threatened to redefine who mattered and who didn't. If the Queen herself could bypass convention, then nothing titles, roles, expectations was safe anymore. And that uncertainty triggered chaos behind the scenes. Lawyers were summoned, documents reviewed, constitutional experts debated in confidential briefings. No one wanted to admit it publicly, but the monarchy wasn't just navigating a wish, it was navigating a legal minefield. What power did a written letter hold? Could the Queen's final words override centuries of precedent? Would Parliament need to intervene? And if so, at what cost? Every answer led to more questions, and each scenario came with its own avalanche of consequences. At the palace, the communications team was paralyzed. One misstep could ignite a public backlash. The wrong word, the wrong tone, and decades of image management could evaporate. Drafts were written and discarded. Advisors argued behind closed doors. Some wanted transparency. Others demanded silence. The official statement never came. Instead, the palace retreated into strategic ambiguity, offering reassurance without resolution. The Queen's wish, for now, remained a family matter, but the public could feel it. Something was shifting, and the cracks in the royal facade were growing harder to hide. All of this unfolded under the strain of a deeper truth, one that no press briefing could contain. The world had changed. Tradition alone was no longer enough to keep the monarchy afloat. The public expected relevance, progress, meaning. And now the family found itself split between two forces: loyalty to the past and survival in the present. The rift was no longer symbolic. It was personal. And while the royal family quietly reels, the future of the monarchy hangs on a single moment: Charles's final move. King Charles's health fades, but his silence speaks volumes. What he chooses next will define royal history. In the weeks that followed the revelation of Queen Elizabeth's final wish, Clarence House became a hive of hushed conversations and veiled glances. King Charles, though physically diminished, remained the sovereign. Yet, behind closed doors, he began meeting frequently with Sir Clive Alderton, his principal private secretary, and one of the few men he trusted implicitly. These weren't casual chats. They were deliberate, urgent, and often held late into the night. What began as isolated briefings evolved into deep strategic sessions. The question was no longer whether change was coming, but how and when. Elizabeth's letter had reignited a storm of expectation, and the king knew that how he responded would determine not only the survival of his reign, but the monarchy's entire trajectory. Some advisors urged caution. Others leaned into legacy. But one message was constant. If the king ignored his mother's final wish, he risked shattering public trust. And at this fragile point in the monarchy's existence, trust was everything. Charles had always envisioned a streamlined, modern institution. Yet now, he found himself at war with his own ambitions. If he honored the Queen's vision for Catherine, would it signal his own irrelevance? If he resisted it, would history remember him as the monarch who silenced the voice of a queen who reigned longer and steadier than any before? Inside the palace, small shifts began to appear. William was suddenly present in rooms where only Charles had once sat. Catherine's calendar grew fuller. Events once designated for the king were now quietly reassigned. No announcements were made, but Clarence. House staff felt it. The pacing had changed. Even Charles's tone during engagements hinted at transition. He praised William more, referenced continuity, and became noticeably more reflective in speeches. His health, while still formally unquantified, was clearly dictating the tempo. But it wasn't just his physical condition that shaped these decisions. It was something deeper, the realization that he may not have the time or the strength to fight against a future that was already unfolding. He hadn't publicly endorsed the Queen's wish. Not yet. But every step, every reallocation of duty, every unspoken nod toward William and Catherine made one truth undeniable. The slow handover had begun. Quietly, strategically, unofficially, yet unmistakably. And all the while, the nation watched, wondering if the man who waited a lifetime for the crown was now preparing to hand it over in silence. But the monarchy's fate isn't sealed yet, because what happens next will test the crown like never before. This is more than succession. This is survival. And the next move will decide the monarchy's future. As the crown teeters between tradition and transformation, the echoes of Queen Elizabeth's final wish still rattle through palace walls. But the implications reach far beyond Britain. across. The Commonwealth whispers are turning into movements. Countries once loyal to the monarch's symbolic leadership are now questioning their ties. Barbados has already severed the link. Others, Jamaica, Australia, Canada, are watching closely, measuring the weight of modern relevance against centuries of inherited legacy. The royal family, once seen as the thread that united diverse nations, now finds itself in a fragile position. Its influence is no longer guaranteed. It must be earned, and in today's world, that power doesn't lie solely in titles or lineage. It lies in perception, in image, in public sentiment. Social media, once a distant threat, now dictates narratives faster than the palace can respond. One photo, one misstep, one leak can reshape public opinion in hours. The monarchy no longer lives in quiet corridors and velvet silence. It exists in tweets, posts, and viral headlines. And that reality demands not just awareness, but adaptation. Silence is no longer a strategy. Transparency is no longer optional. This is the burden now, falling on the youngest generation of royals. Prince William, poised on the edge of destiny, carries not just the expectations of his father, but the hopes of an institution desperate to remain relevant. His choices will define more than just protocol, they will define trust. Catherine, the unexpected centerpiece of Queen Elizabeth's vision, must now walk a line between duty and destiny. And even Anne, ever the steady hand behind the throne, continues to prove that loyalty can still shine in the shadows. These three, William, Catherine, and Anne, represent not just the future of the monarchy, but its potential to endure.